How you guys doing this morning? Huh? How you guys doing this morning? All right, good. It's an honor for me to speak and share Word of God with you this morning. And before I start, I wanted to jump into a story. I wanted to tell you a little bit of a personal journey that me and Natalie have gone through, and we'll kind of unravel that journey as we go today. About 4 years ago, Natalie and I moved back to Sacramento from Dallas. We were in Dallas, Texas for about 3 years. The move came back quicker than we had wanted to come back. We weren't planning on coming back so quick after we moved, but we had to be closer with family. Natalie's mother, my mother-in-law, was sick with cancer. She had ovarian cancer stage 4, and so we wanted to be close to the family. So we came back early. After returning, Natalie and I didn't think that we were going to come back to Revival, being honest with you guys. We did not think that we were going to come back here. We were actually thinking about going to a different church as we came back to Sacramento. And for about 3 to 4 months, we checked out the different churches. We checked out a lot of the kind of popular big churches that have really good sermons and have really cool worship sets and, big, organized, well-planned out events. And we checked those out. And after doing that for a while, we were not fitting into any of those churches. It just was not working for us. We felt that God was calling us to this church, to Revival. Now, folks, God was not telling us to come here because this was the best church. This church at that time was still healing from what happened a couple of years before that when some of the pastors had left the church. So there was a lot going on here. This was a work in progress. But we felt that God was calling us here. We felt that the seminary experience and working in a different church in Dallas was equipping us to pour out and help this church kind of move in a different direction. And we felt that God was telling us to step in and do that here. It wasn't long after we came here that we found ourselves surrounded by like-minded people. We found a handful of young couples and a handful of individuals that also had this vision of starting an English service and serving the community. To grow closer with this group of people, we started doing small groups. We started getting together. We started building relationships and breaking bread. We met regularly for, about 6 months. We had a plan. We had a team. We were excited. We were following a dream. It was going pretty well. Going into the summer of 2015, we had over 14 people in this group that met regularly, okay? We had a lot of people that were kind of excited about it. However, that summer in 2015, one of the couples moved away. 2 other couples left to a different church. Some of the singles, they went to other churches. They disappeared. They stopped attending Revival. And so by September of 2015, only 9 months after we had this huge group of people working, we were down to 3 couples. 3 couples that were already not knee-deep, up here in ministry. There really wasn't a whole lot of room to dream and move in any direction. We felt like the only people at Revival that wanted to have an English service had left. We were discouraged. We were tired. We felt like we failed. Folks, there's going to be time in life when we're challenged beyond our ability. Okay? We'll hit a dead end in our relationships, in our careers, in our ministry, and in our spiritual life. There's going to be those situations. It's inevitable. It's a matter of time. We will experience failure. As we walk through life, we're going to encounter these situations that seem beyond our ability to control. As Christians, we're not exempt from this. Nothing in the Bible says that you will not experience failure, okay? Nothing in the Bible says that you will not experience discouragement. You will experience these things in life. In fact, when we talk to God, right, and seek His heart and ask Him to use us in His kingdom, we are literally asking Him to stretch us, okay? And we're asking Him to challenge us. We're saying, God, take me into this challenge. We're literally asking Him to do that. This is what happened to Natalie and I. We asked for God to use us, and He used us at Revival. The reality, folks, is that this has been the experience of God-fearing men and women throughout ministry. Throughout the Bible, we see many stories of people going through challenges. Today, I want to go on one such journey, on one such hero, and how he dealt with fear of these situations. How would you like to understand how to handle these types of situations? So just 2 people, 3, 4. You guys want to know what the Bible tells us on how to deal with difficult situations? I mean, if we ask for people to say who doesn't have any kind of difficult situation, if somebody didn't raise their hand, then they're just not really here, right? Because we all have difficult situations. And before we turn to Exodus chapter 3, I want to set up the context of the story that we're going to spend the rest of our afternoon looking at. We're going to be looking and talking about Moses. Who knows Moses? Yeah. Moses is kind of a big deal in the Old Testament. He literally wrote the first 5 books. He wrote them, okay? He wrote Genesis. He wrote creation. He wrote all these books. He wrote the law. He was instrumental, okay? Moses is an Israelite, okay? He's a Hebrew. He was born 400 years after Jacob arrives in Egypt with his entire family. You guys all know the story. There was a famine. Jacob moved his whole family over to Egypt. Fortunately, his son had a really high seat in Egypt, and so they were taken care of. So this was 400 years later. They've been living in Egypt this whole time. And Moses was born 400 years later. He's given the name Moses, which sets in motion his mission in life, which is to draw out. That's what his name means, to draw out his people from Egypt. Through the wisdom of his mother and the mercy of Pharaoh's daughter, he survived the genocide of Israelite baby boys. At that time, guys, Israelite boys Israelite family was growing so fast, Egyptians are worried that they were going to take over or maybe rise against them. And so they started trying to kill all the baby boys. And that's when Moses was born. But he was spared because his mother was wise and because Pharaoh's daughter had mercy on him. Moses was basically adopted into the house of Pharaoh and received the best upbringing, education, training, and lifestyle available at that time in the world. He's the most well taken care of Israelite by far at this point in time in the story. And about 40 years into his life, here's what the Bible tells us. Exodus 2, 11 through 15. Moses went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that way and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day, he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you've killed this Egyptian?" Moses was afraid though. Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian. Moses messed up big time, you guys. Okay? By the end of chapter 2, he had lost his status, okay, as member of Pharaoh's family. He committed murder, okay? He is a fugitive on the run after this story. The people who he wanted to protect and had a soft spot for have just shunned him away. They've rejected him. He finds himself in a foreign land, okay, married to a foreign woman, tending her father's sheep. I can picture Moses at this point wondering, what did I do? Like, you had all this opportunity in the world, and now you're nobody, nothing, hiding in the middle of nowhere. You're nobody. And this is where we pick up the story, guys. Now, Moses was tending the flock. I'm going to be reading a lot of Bible. Hopefully you guys don't mind that I read a lot of Bible. Now, Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face, because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them out of that land and into the good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of Canaanites and a bunch of other people. And now the cry of Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. This narrative escalated really quickly. 1 minute, Moses was going about his really boring, mundane life in the middle of the desert, doing nothing, tending sheep. The next minute, he's talking to God. Okay? It's been 40 years since he's had anything to do with Israelites. And then God's telling him to go and get Israelites back. Bring him out. I want to point out 2 things from these first 10 verses. First is Moses' initial reaction to God speaking to him. Verse 6 tells us that when God spoke to Moses, what did he do? He hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Moses is afraid to look at God, and he's afraid of God because of his guilt and shame. Moses committed a sin and ran away from his responsibilities. Okay, so when God revealed himself who he is to him, he could not look at him straight in the eye. He was afraid. He hid in shame. But guys, the other point I want to point out is what God says and doesn't say when he speaks to Moses. In the first 10 verses, how many times does God remind him of his past sin? None. God does not mention once to Moses how bad of a person he is because of what he has done in the past. Okay? He simply moves on with the plan that he has for him. Some of you are convinced that because of what you've done in the past, God cannot use you anymore. And there are others in here that say, look, my sin is so bad that maybe I'll be able to do because I feel like I have to serve somewhere. So I'll just usher once a month. But there's no way that God can use me in a Bible study or to lead a worship set or to preach from the pulpit or to tell somebody about God because I have committed sin. Folks, this text gives us the good news. God didn't look at Moses' laundry list of failures and sins. Okay? God has a plan and a purpose for you. It doesn't matter how bad your past is. We have to understand that. Whatever you've done in the past, you can come before him, you can lay that down in front of him, and you have a clean slate. God will use you. We see that here with this story. Moses is instrumental to the Old Testament. Without him, we don't know anything about creation. We lose so much about God. And God used this person after all that he's done. Coming back to the text, God appears to Moses, doesn't remind him of his past, and gives him marching orders to bring the Israelites out of bondage. Let's keep reading the text. But Moses says to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God says, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. What kind of responses do we have here from Moses? It's an excuse. It's actually first of 4 excuses that he gives in this text that we're going to go over today. Moses is saying, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? We may be critical of Moses thinking like, what are you doing? You're speaking to God. And I will say that literally phrase a lot here. But this excuse is very common, especially in church, in ministry. When we experience failure, okay, we have a tendency to resist God's call. When we've experienced failure in our life, in ministry, in our relationship, at work, we resist God's call to move forward. Moses is really saying, God, I don't have the confidence to do what you're asking me to do. By the fall of 2015, most of that initial team that we had, they were gone. They left to other churches, they moved on. We spent months working together, trying to build chemistry, trying to build relationship, trying to grow together, and all these people left. We went through a rough period. End of 2016, early 2016. Natalie's mom passed away early 2016. This was a difficult part of our life that we walked through. We experienced a lot of failure and loss during that period of time. We didn't have a whole lot of hope or even thought much about the English service at that point in time, realistically speaking. I personally felt like I failed to organize. If anybody knows me, I love administering and organizing things, okay? We had a lot that we were trying to do, and I personally felt like I failed. That we had this group of people. 14 people is more than enough people to start something, and they're gone. In early 2016, Ruslan took over working with youth and had a conversation with me about working together to begin to build on youth and work towards an English service. At that point, Natalie and I, we were very hesitant to respond and join. We experienced that it's not very easy. Failure sucks. I don't know if I want to do this again. We didn't think there was enough people at Revival that even wanted an English service because there was not a whole lot of support after our group fell apart. We thought about going somewhere else. We tried looking at the situation from our human ability perspective. Okay? It wasn't possible. We already tried. It didn't work. Okay? What else is there can I tell you, Russ? It didn't work. As we learn in this text, it's not who Moses is. It's not his self-esteem or his ability. It's whose he is. Okay? God sent him, and it's God who will be with him. God sent him. Moses' authority is based upon his divine call, okay? And that divine presence is going to be there when he goes. Folks, it's not about who you are. It's about whose you are when it comes to serving in God's kingdom, okay? It's important to understand that piece. It's important to understand that when we feel like we're being called to a new ministry, when we feel like we're being called to a challenging ministry, when we feel like we cannot continue what we're doing right now. It's also important to understand that in the context of your job, your relationship, your dreams. It's not about who you are. It's about whose you are. No matter how capable, there is no man that is fit or able to adequately serve God. Okay? There's nobody in this room, doesn't matter how gifted they are, how much education they've had, you cannot serve God on your own ability, period. You cannot please him. We are not perfect. We cannot do it. It is God who is infinite, who is eternal, and who is all-powerful. Only with him can we serve. We got to learn from this text that when we serve, we must focus our attention on Christ, okay, on God, the one who we serve rather than on what it is that we're doing specifically. And this is difficult for me sometimes. It's like John said last week, and this text confirms it. Only when we partner with God can we achieve the great things that God has planned for our life. Without that, you cannot do that. You cannot achieve. You're going to only achieve what you can think of in your mind, and we don't have the imagination that God does. Let's keep reading. Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your father has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you." God also said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation." Going back to verse 13, Moses basically asks God, look, if someone might ask me, I'm not too sure, like, who's this God that's sending me here? You got to look at it from his perspective. They didn't have the Bible back then. There was absolutely no text. It was just oral tradition at that point in time. So I don't completely blame him for asking that question. Knowing God is the highest calling that a Christian could have. In fact, every one of us, doesn't matter what we do, we should strive to better know God through life. That is something that we should always achieve to do. But Moses does not seek the knowledge for himself. He seeks it because he fears that the Israelites will reject his authority. Okay? He wants to get all this additional information to make sure that he doesn't look like a fool when he comes before them. In other words, it's the reflection. It's basically the same fears that Moses had in that first verse. In the first verse, he's saying, who am I that I should go? They're not going to listen to me. Here he's saying, wait, who is the God that's sending me? I need to make sure I understand this because I'm not sure they're going to accept me. It's the same fears coming out again in another question. In other words, this is really a reflection of him admitting the first question all over again, okay? This is an excuse that stems from fear, okay? Moses is using an excuse that a lot of us use. He's saying, people will ask me questions. What if I don't know the answers to these questions? They're going to ask me about God, and I don't know what to, I'm not sure I can explain God. This is something that comes early in our Christian lives, and it sticks around. Many of us seek to avoid immediately acting on God's command because we use the excuse, the lack of education, lack of knowledge, lack of training. How often do we say things like, I need to think it over. I need to pray about it. When in reality, we are reluctant to obey God's calling. Many of us have excused ourselves because we haven't been to seminary or we haven't been to Bible school. Moses didn't go to either one. Very often, we are just using excuses to hide our unbelief, guys. We're using excuses because we don't believe that we can do what God is asking us to do. Folks, in reality, we are never ready when we try to act on our own. We're never ready. It doesn't matter how much education or training or lack of. You're never ready to act on your own, okay? But we are always ready when God says go. If God is telling you to move in something, He's got a plan to get you ready along the way. Yes, optimally, we'd like to be well prepared. But in reality, most of our lessons in life that we've had so far, we've learned on the go and experience. It doesn't matter how much your parents told you, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that, stay away from that. You still did it, and you learned the lesson the hard way anyways. So why are we avoiding that and saying, God, well, I'm not well prepared yet, when in everything else in life, you literally avoid instruction and just walk into it and figure it out when you get there. What God is saying to Moses is, you may not have all the answers. I know you don't. But you have all of me. The I am will be with you. Amen. Okay? Let's keep reading. Moses answers, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, has appeared to you. In verses 6 through 9, God actually gives Moses a few more cool tricks and moves that he can use to show that God has appeared to him. Okay? In verse 1 here, we have Moses' third excuse. His excuse? What if the Israelites don't believe me or don't listen to me? Moses is concerned about his image here. He's worried that he will not be respected and that he will be rejected. Okay? He's afraid that he's going to go before them, going to try to speak. They're going to disrespect and they're going to reject him. They're not going to listen to him. I don't think I've ever heard that excuse in the church. If you're honest, how many times have you been prompted in your heart to speak to someone? Maybe it's in a public place, in school, or at work. Maybe speak to them about God. Maybe just pray with them. Maybe just listen to them because you can tell they're going through a rough situation, and we backed out because we did not know how those people were going to react. Like, let's be honest here. I've done that before. You know, we think, well, that's a coworker. I have to, like, sit next to this person. What if they don't, like, accept this and they're going to think I'm weird? I have to go to school with that kid. What if they're going to think I'm really weird and not talk to me anymore? Okay? We make up excuses that we will be rejected and we will not be accepted. The other thing Moses is saying is he's concerned that the Israelites will criticize him when he comes to them. I consider myself pretty young and limited experience, but I know this much about criticism. When you minister and when you walk with God, when you're doing something, you're going to get criticized. Yes. Okay? You're either going to be in the penthouse or the outhouse. Okay? I've experienced this. I have parents either come and tell me that I'm doing a great job with you all, or they come and say, why are you doing that? 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 Yeah. You're either in the penthouse or the outhouse. You're going to get criticized. If you're too young, they'll say you lack experience. Okay? If you have gray hair, they'll say you're too old, you cannot connect with young people. If you have no children, you're setting a bad example, not biblical. If you have more than 6 children, how can you possibly responsibly raise that many kids in our culture? Okay? If the message is too spiritual, it's not biblical enough. You're not using the Bible. Okay? If the speaker preaches from his notes in the Bible, he's not spirit-led. Okay? If the worship music is traditional and soft, it's not allowing the Spirit to flow. Okay? If the music is too loud and new, it's not allowing people to connect to God. If the pastor fails to please everybody, he's hurting the church. And if the pastor pleases everybody, then he has no personal conviction that he stands on. If he drives an old car, he's shaming the congregation. If he drives a new car, he loves the thing of this world too much. Okay? If the pastor receives a large salary, he's getting paid way too much. If he receives a small salary, well, that just proves he's not worth much. Okay? There's going to be criticism every step of the way. Doesn't matter what you do. Okay? You'll never please everybody. But it's not a reason to step down or step out of a ministry. Stay at task when you're serving God, folks. You will attract criticism, but God says, I can handle this staff. I can handle criticism on your behalf. Some will criticize, some will disrespect, some will reject you. It's all good. Let God deal with them. Amen. Elbert Hubbard, an American writer and philosopher, said, to avoid criticism, all you have to do is say nothing, do nothing, and be nothing. That's all you have to do to avoid criticism. And folks, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a pretty boring life. I'd like to be able to fulfill what God has destined for me to fulfill. When you serve God, you're going to make mistakes. People will see your flaws in your life. They're going to criticize. Just let God deal with it. We're going to keep reading. In verse 10, Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. The Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. Reading this now, I'm starting to feel very embarrassed for Moses. Like, what are you doing? You're talking to God? You're making up these lame excuses. Looking back, to answer the last 3 questions that he had, this is what God already told Moses. Don't worry about it. You're not alone. I'm going with you. I am God. Trust me. They will know who I am. I'll take care of that. Don't worry about what the Israelites will say because I will be with you. That's what he's been saying to him all along. And Moses is still focusing on his ability, not God's ability. Okay? He is still hung up on his personal inability instead of God's ability. I've also never heard this excuse in the church. These are all new excuses to me, like never heard them before, right? This excuse is, I don't have the ability for that ministry. I'm not as qualified as someone else. John can teach better, okay? Ruslan can teach better. David does worship way better than I could ever. I'm not even going to try it. That's the excuse that Moses is using here. We learn from other passages that in the New Testament that Moses may not have actually had a whole lot of speech issues and that this was likely false humility. Okay, in Acts it says that Moses was good in word and deed. So a lot of times we have false humility when it comes to serving. And for the first time in God's conversation with Moses, God's response reveals displeasure because he rebukes him when he responds back for the first time. Moses is speaking to his creator, telling him that he is not qualified to do what God is asking him to do because God did not make him well enough. It's kind of silly. You guys, if you are walking with God, you have a personal relationship with God, and you're presented with the opportunity to serve in a ministry, any ministry, and you hear, and your heart skips a beat, Do not look at your ability and talk yourself out of qualification. Okay? If you feel prompted to do anything in the context of ministry, or if you feel prompted towards a new major in college, if you feel prompted towards something that God is putting in your heart, He's giving you a dream, don't talk yourself out of qualification. God has more in store for you. Finally, in verse 13, we see that Moses has now had enough time to, as we say, think it over, okay, and pray about it. And Moses comes up with this great answer to God on his, he says, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Moses, what are you doing? You're speaking to God. You're literally afraid to look at him because you know he could kill you in a split second. And over here you're saying, "Nah, I'm good." You guys, Moses does not lack assurance and does not lack authority because God is sending him to do this, okay? And God just answered his first 4 excuses by giving him support, saying, "Look, I'll take care of that. I'll take care of them over there. I'll help you out." He's provided everything. So he's got assurance and he's got authority. Moses simply lacks courage because he's got everything provided. He can move. No reason is even stated as to why God should send someone else. Moses is out of excuses. There's no excuse up there. He just says, "Thanks, but no thanks." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so that you can perform the signs with it." God's done talking to him. He just tells him to go. Moses obeys. He goes home to explain to his father-in-law and to his wife that he has to go back. Even then, he's not being completely honest. He says, "Let me return to my own people in Egypt so that I can see if they're still alive." I don't know if that's God. We didn't get any of that from what we read, but whatever, Moses. It's at this point that Moses is traveling back to Egypt with his family that we run into a very, very weird verse. There's a very weird verse in here that it seems like it doesn't make any sense. It seems like it's out of place. We're now in verse 24. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife. Zipporah is his wife. Zipporah. Took a flint knife and cut off her son's foreskin. She circumcised them and touched Moses' feet with it. "Surely you are the bridegroom of blood to me," she said. So the Lord let him alone. What just happened? Right? That makes no sense when you read it. It makes no sense. It seems so unusual and so harsh. What does this action on Z's part mean? What is the purpose of including this story in Exodus? Surely this is some kind of incident, right? That it shouldn't have been in there. Maybe this was in there by accident somehow. You know what's interesting is that Moses wrote this book. Okay, and he felt that it was necessary to include that in there. Having spent a decent amount of time looking at these couple of chapters, I'm convinced that this weird event is actually the key to the entire story that we've read so far. Explaining Moses' deeply rooted resistance to obeying God's call to return to Egypt. You see, folks, the gospel, if you would, of Israelites was the covenant between God and Abraham. That was their gospel. That was all they had. An oral tradition explained for hundreds of years. Okay, this covenant made between God and Moses. And this was reiterated to all the different patriarchs, Jacob, Isaac. It was passed down. Circumcision was the sign of this covenant. That was the sign of this covenant. It was the evidence of the parents' faith in the promise of God to Abraham, that through his seed, blessings would come to Israel and to the whole world. Every male in Israel was to be circumcised as a testimony of their parents' faith in God's covenant promise. Moses was being asked to go to Egypt and tell Israelites that God was about to fulfill this promise based upon this covenant. Yet Moses had not even circumcised his own son. Probably his firstborn. It doesn't matter. He's been there for 40 years. He has 2 sons. He had time. Verses 24 and 26 identify the underlying problem with Moses' fear: unbelief. He doesn't believe. If we're to summarize his excuses that we read so far, we see that he's basically saying, but God, they won't believe me. Moses' fear about Israel's unbelief are rooted in his own unbelief, okay? The basis for God's redemption of Israel from Egyptians is the Abrahamic covenant. The reason why Moses was not ready to return to Egypt is that he did not have sufficient faith himself. He did not believe. And since he did not have faith in God's covenant, he didn't expect the Israelites to have faith in God's covenant. The evidence of Moses' lack of faith is here in his failure to circumcise his own son as evidence of his personal trust of God's promise. There are 2 separate stories that are intertwined here, guys. The first we can call his personal walk with God. The second we can call his public work for God. Moses' objections, his excuses, all dealt with a reference to the public work. But the essence of his protest is his last petition: send someone else. While God is graciously answering every inquiry and makes provision for every concern, we never really get to the root of Moses' problem. Where we find that Moses' problem really lies with regard to his public work, returning to Egypt and rescuing Israel, they're all rooted in his personal walk with God. He had not circumcised his son. You know what that means? That means that his personal and family life at home had not reflected any faith in God. He didn't believe that God was real. Otherwise, he would have circumcised his son. You guys see what I'm saying? So when God's telling him, like, go and do this, he has no belief. He doesn't believe that he has to do that. He doesn't believe in this God. He cannot challenge men and women to step out into obedience based upon their faith in God when he has not yet circumcised his own son as evidence of his own faith. Folks, the same goes for us. We cannot challenge others to step out into faith and obedience if we do not show this obedience and faith in the simple things in our private walk with God. It doesn't work any other way. Moses' problem in his relationship to his public work are rooted in his public or in his personal walk. It's no wonder that Paul wrote this in Timothy. He said to Timothy, watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. Folks, when I was getting ready to preach this text, I was initially going to talk about the excuses that Moses used 3,500 years ago and that we still use today to get out of serving God, to get out living our purpose that he had for us. And folks, I was going to tell you that you need to realize that you're unique and you need to accept it and work with God, and that's still true. I was going to tell you that you need to remember that you have nothing to prove because God is with you, and that's still true. And I was going to tell you to refuse every temptation to compare, and that's still true, but that's not what I want you to walk away from here. What I want you to walk away from is this. Our ability to serve God, to face challenges in life, to achieve dreams, all depend on our personal walk with God. Okay? Do we have faith and do we trust God in the simple things in life? That's the question. In our relationship, in our finances, in our health, do we show that faith in obedience? My favorite one here is tithing. If we don't tithe, we don't believe that God blesses us. It's so simple. The Bible tells us to do it. Folks, Your obedience in your personal walk with God is what's either going to allow God to use you to your full potential, or it will keep you in the desert like Moses was. You know what he was doing in the desert? He was doing nothing in the desert. He was living among strangers. He was working a dead-end job. He had no ambition. He was not serving the kingdom of God. If that's what you want to do, I don't want to do that. Natalie and I joined up with Russ and Anna, okay, in 2016, and a bunch of other people. We worked slower than we did the first time. We worked with a senior pastor. We allowed God to refine our personal lives and our family lives along the way. We learned that through this process, that if there's gonna be an English service, it's not because of my ability or Russ's ability, it's because God wants this service to be here to serve this community, okay? We learn how to trust God and work with others by serving on Friday nights, working in youth for a whole year. Take some humility, okay? And this past fall, we launched in October. Folks, where we lost half a dozen, by the end, it's really a dozen, of people from that initial team. You know how God filled the spots? God filled up the spots with young people from our church. He filled up the spots with people like Irina Chili, okay? Alina Chili, Henrietta, Diana, Nazari, Angela, Melanie, Jan, Ella. These are all kids a few years ago. And He's using them in leadership roles right now in this church, okay? God also brought us reinforcements, okay? We got John and David Alvarado who's helping us out. We got Serge, Jessica Gonzin. We got Taylor, Andrea, Luke, Nazari, Melanie, who we prayed for today. We didn't have these people. These people were not activated a few years ago. Folks, if we can trust and obey God in our private walk, we allow Him to fully bless us, okay? And live our life to its full potential. It's simple as that. That was Moses' problem. The excuses were just, they were front. I want us to stand up. We're going to pray right now. If you're here today and you don't have a personal relationship with Christ, we want to pray for you today. Because folks, the fears that you have in your mind when you don't have God in your heart, those fears are going to come true. They're going to prevent you from living out even the things that you can come up with. Okay? But when we have a personal relationship with God, when we walk with God, we're going to achieve things we can't even imagine. But that only happens when we walk in partnership with God. Okay, so we're going to pray right now. If you feel like you want to renew your relationship with Christ, okay, you want to walk in step with Him, I want you to come down here. We're going to pray today. We're going to pray. The whole church is going to pray. If you're one of those people that wants to be prayed for, if you want to accept what Jesus can give you in walking in a relationship, I want you to come forward. We're going to pray.